Here's the thing I like to say about Jared's communication style. He's the kind of guy that can rip into your, put his arm into your chest, rip out your heart, speak sweet nothings of the gospel to it, and put it back in your chest, and make you say thank you.
Family, multiplication, restoration. I'm Dahadi Lewis. Join me, Noah Oldham and Hayden Radner, as we come to you from Atlanta, St. Louis, and Las Vegas, as we seek to add value to your church planting journey. We'll have real-time, authentic conversations that are relevant to the life of the church planter and pastor. Join us as we hear from leaders of this movement from across North America and discover what it really takes to plant churches everywhere for everyone.
Welcome back to another episode of the We Are Send Network podcast. My name is Noah Oldham, lead pastor of August Gate in St. Louis, joined as always by Hayden Ratner of Walk Church in Las Vegas, Nevada. We're here at SBC this week, annual meeting 2021, and have the opportunity to meet with leaders from the SBC from all over North America, some of our very favorites. And today we have one of those favorites of mine, Jared Wilson, author, speaker, professor, and all kinds of amazing things about you.
Witty Twitter.
Oh man, dude.
Good follow right here.
Twitter prophet, I'm saying, man.
Okay.
This guy has been slaying me since before he knew I was even around. Here's the thing I like to say about Jared's communication style. He's the kind of guy that can rip into your, put his arm into your chest, rip out your heart, speak sweet nothings of the gospel to it, and put it back in your chest, and make you say thank you.
Lock it back in.
Dude, it's so good. Seriously, man. I've been so blessed by your ministry over the years. Great. I still remember the first time I heard you speak at a boot camp in St. Louis. You were at a dinner that night before and got to hear you share with a bunch of pastors. But then through the years, I think you've just gotten better and better in your shepherding of leaders.
It's almost like sanctification is real.
Oh, man, it is real. It is real.
It's almost like it's true.
It is.
I'm being transformed right now.
But I read a couple of your books recently, and they all have the word gospel-driven in them. And I thought today, what an awesome opportunity for us to talk about gospel-driven church planting.
Yeah.
And so I really want to open it up there. Jared, if you would tell us just right now, like gospel-driven, why is that a phrase that you continue to latch onto?
Yeah, well, for a few reasons. Number one, because philosophically or theologically, I think that it's the major emphasis of the New Testament in terms of how we do life and ministry, right? So I tend to emphasize these days kind of the major implications of it, because I think we're in this kind of phase in evangelicalism or era, I guess, where we're in danger of kind of losing the meaning of it. It's the terminology gets used a lot, gospel-centered this, and gospel groups and gospel churches and gospel meals, and my gospel friends are going to have gospel fun at our gospel, playground, those sorts of things. So just kind of throw it out.
I feel attacked right now.
But I do that. I do that too, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Yeah. If you don't lose what the meaning is, the substance is. If it's just about throwing labels on or identifying with a trend or a tribe, then then we lose something. It becomes shallow. So for me, it's constantly trying to bring people back to seeing the substance, the essence of gospel centrality, which I tend to break down into three major implications. One is how you understand, preach, teach, study the Bible, right? How you read the Bible, basically, and how you preach the Bible. Is Christ the culmination? Is he the star of the whole book?
Yeah.
Is the whole book about Jesus? Yeah. So that's number one. And has major implications for how you disciple people, how you preach a sermon, all those sorts of things. Secondly, how you answer the question, how people change, right? So we're always answering that question, even if just implicitly in our sermons, in our disciple making, in our counseling sessions, in our parenting, all that sort of thing. Right. We're implicitly answering the question, how people change. And the gospel-centered paradigm would say, the New Testament says the way people change is by, in some way, being confronted or beholding the glory of Jesus. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18, it's by beholding the glory of Christ with an unveiled face that we are transformed from one degree of glory into another. So the way people change is by seeing Jesus, by the gospel. And then thirdly, where you find your validation, where you find your justification. Gospel centrality says it's not just that the gospel's for lost people and then you get saved and you move on to other things, but you're actually sanctified by that same gospel. Paul talks about that in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, first few verses, and numerous other places. So to keep coming back to the gospel, it's for the Christian. So those are kind of the three major implications and why I just am so passionate about it, because we just tend to drift so much. And I just want to just keep, herding people back and kind of, calling people back to it.
That's so good. Yeah, so we think about, how churches are going to be planted, healthy churches that are going to last.
Yeah.
Like just applying that gospel-driven paradigm to that. But you even talking about the pastor's justification, like this justification of the leader and finding my identity and my validation in ministry. One of the biggest aspects of church planting is this entrepreneurial spirit.
Right.
I remember I was actually told, I went through my first church planting assessment, that I wasn't a church planter because my score was so low. Entrepreneurial score was so low, and I just said, "Well, I knew how to answer the questions. I'm not a risk taker. I want to know God is saying to do it, and then I'll go do it."
Right, okay.
But they thought you're not going to do that. But I did. I found myself over and over again. That's the hardest place to apply the gospel to. So how do we apply the gospel to that, the win and the success and the entrepreneurial thing? How do we do that?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with just the motivation and kind of the heart posture. And I agree. I think especially the lead church planner needs to have that kind of builder mentality, kind of have that entrepreneurial spirit to them. But then to always remember in the midst of that, in all of the energy being spent, that you're not building a monument to yourself, or you're not trying to heal some wound from the past, or you're not trying to correct what everybody else has gotten wrong, at least in your own perception.
Sure.
You're not trying to build the antithesis of the church you grew up in, or the church that you felt hurt in, or something like that. That, I think, what is actually driving you? Is it to make Jesus famous? Is it to expand his glory? Is it to reach the lost? Is it really to expand the mission? Or is it to just kind of build a tower? And I think the difference can be subtle sometimes, because if we're not self-aware, if we're not evaluating ourselves, we can so easily kind of fall into that. So I don't think it means to be gospel-centered is to squelch that kind of spirit, or that kind of mentality, or those traits, but what the motivation for them is, and where you're putting your hope and your trust. So when things aren't going exactly as you wish they would, if people aren't showing up the way that you think that they should, if the doors aren't opening the way that where does your heart go in response to that? Are you completely demoralized? Are you thrown into despair? Or are you trusting, okay, I need to be faithful, put all of my energy into faithfulness, and trust the Lord with the results?
Yeah.
That's kind of how the gospel helps you, curb, I guess, the sense of pride and self-interest in those things.
Good. Kind of reminds me of a quote that I once heard Tim Keller say. He said, "The gospel is not just about God's power, but it is God's power."
That's right.
And what I hear you saying is, like, the gospel is working its way into every facet of ministry, whether that's in the academy or whether that's in the church plant that's just is launching, doing that with a gospel framework, gospel motivation, gospel driven. I think really helps the planter, but like myself, who, we had 200 plus people on our launch Sunday, and week number 2 dropped to 86. And I thought, man, like, if it went to 50%, I would feel bad, but we won't for sure. Like, these people are coming back. We had a great launch Sunday.
Right.
And then when it went below that, and that's with kids, I was like, who am I? Why even continue? And I think it's the gospel that you kind of land on. And you can build back up from that. It was never about that in the first place.
Yeah, I had to learn that lesson as well, and actually, I was pretty new into the gospel-centered thing, even before it was kind of a thing. I mean, I didn't know that's what it was. I just knew what the Lord had done in my own life, and when He began to open doors for ministry for me again, and I planted a church here in Nashville, Tennessee, actually.
Wow.
And people stayed away in droves. we had all the things that I think, but I didn't have the entrepreneurial thing. I think if I was looking back, that's something that's like I didn't have the right makeup of the team, and I don't think I would do it again. But in any event, we had the elements that they say you're supposed to have, and it just wasn't working. And there was a crisis of my soul every week as I'm praying for God to send just somebody else through the door. I'm glad when the band sits down, so I have someone to preach to, that kind of thing. And so, I had to,
get out of the green room. I need somebody in these seats.
It was the gauntlet for me. Okay, what am I in this for? Is this just for my own, self-validation? Is this just for my own exaltation to feel good? Is this for my self-esteem, or am I in this, to be faithful to the Lord and to love people. And that really helped me because the next ministry context I went to was a revitalization effort in a very irreligious place, very hostile to Christianity up in the Northeast. And people started showing up like crazy.
Wow.
You know, we had all the good problems, right? Running out of seats, running out of parking spaces, all that sort of thing. And I think my experience at the church plant really helped me in that. Not that I was, never given to pride or anything like that, but it tempered me for when the success came.
Yeah.
I was able to go, you know what? I've been through the lack, and now I'm going through the gain, and I've learned that Jesus is sweet in both, and I'm not gonna tune my heart to either one.
So
I'm not, I don't want to get puffed up, and I don't want to go into despair. I want to make sure that my validation is what Christ has done for me.
Yeah, I want to go a little bit deeper into that, and not just deeper into that. Something that we're working on in our church plant context is just how to have a more gospel-centered discipleship pathway. And I've recently gathered some different books to just help me think through this topic. One book I purchased was Imperfect Disciple.
Okay.
And I loved the name. I honestly have not read the book yet.
Okay.
It's in my pile.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, but you should get. But I was just going to ask you, just even the name was compelling because there's something about that idea that relates.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Talk to us about where that came from.
Yeah. Well, it was sort of born of the idea of, people who feel like most discipleship training programs or discipleship, pathways are built for people who are kind of already really good at discipleship.
Got it.
Right?
Wow.
They're for the smart people. They're for the people who are, somewhat spiritual, that sort of thing. But for the rest of us who kind of feel left behind and kind of want to linger with Jesus sometimes, and feel like it's hard to get up in the morning.
Yeah.
We're not Christian until we've had a couple cups of coffee.
Yeah. Wow.
I wanted to write a discipleship book
Talk to
for
me.
them. Yeah, and bring the kind of gospel-centered principles in, but in a very kind of autobiographical way. So that book is very it's very personal. There's a lot of storytelling in it. But it's just sort of my way of saying, look, I've been there. I have felt that just moving through discipleship classes, the kind of churches that I grew up in had what we call discipleship training. And they had an element, a necessary component of discipleship, which is teaching more information.
Got it.
That you're learning more about the Bible. But it was never personalized. There were never really heart level questions. There was never kind of pressing in. There was never grabbing the heart out and kind of, it was just knowing more stuff.
Yeah.
And that's that's a means to an end biblically. You have to know more about the Bible. To be transformed begins with the renewing of your mind. But when that's the end into itself, it just becomes about becoming sort of the Bible trivia nerd or just being really smart. And so that's the kind of discipleship that I grew up in. And so, my brain was getting bigger. I knew more stuff about the Bible and more stuff about Jesus, but I didn't really feel close to him.
Wow.
I don't think,
You're not exercising it necessarily.
Yeah, I didn't feel like he liked me. No matter how much I learned, I never sensed a closeness to him.
Wow.
And so that book is really kind of a remedy to say, no, it doesn't mean that we jettison learning more about the scriptures, but it's about what you do with that knowledge, as you said, and about closeness with Christ, and what his approval of you is based on.
Yeah.
Because I always believed
good.
that that his approval of me was based on my performance or my production. And to come to the radical realization that his approval of me is based on what he has done, credited to me, is just,
So good.
it just blew up everything. So that's what the book is kind of about.
Yeah.
I love that. Thanks for the trailer. The in-person.
right. Yeah, that's right.
That's what the book is about.
There you go.
It's like reading the back cover.
Yeah.
But him reading it to you in his own voice, that's awesome.
This is great.
I hope you're willing to put on the prophet hat for just a second here.
Okay.
Usually you do that behind the safety of your keyboard sometimes, but you're good at it. But you have not been shy to point out some of the dangers that the church can creep into different areas and negotiating the gospel for the sake of maybe pragmatism.
Yeah.
Other things. Speaking specifically to church planters, as a friend, not a foe, not because you're trying to be combative or hurt our feelings, but what do you think maybe one or two of the dangers that we could lose the gospel in for the sake of making the thing work? What are maybe some of those dangers we can wade into?
Yeah, well, I think you mentioned the one that still stands out to me, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Not necessarily in relation specifically to church planting, but just the future of the church.
Yeah,
sure.
And anyone who says, here, this is the future of the church, I was like, we need to get out of that prediction business a little bit, because only the Lord really knows the future of the church. Aside from we know that He's going to build His church, right? Aside from that, we know He will deliver His church.
Yeah.
But in terms of like what are the ups and downs and to the as the 21st century keeps going. But a few years ago, Mark Dever said the greatest threat, and this is interesting too, right? Because everyone has their idea of what the greatest threat to evangelicalism is.
Sure.
The greatest threat is this and not the other thing.
Want to add yours now?
Yeah, I do. Well, I want to confirm what he said. So basically, he said that the greatest threat indirect to evangelicalism today is pragmatism in the churches. And I agree with that because it can be manifested in so many different ways. It can be manifested in the way that sometimes we're tempted to downplay some of the sharper edges of biblical teaching to accommodate and not make people uncomfortable. Kind of a holdover from what the seeker-sensitive movement kind of became. There's still elements of that. Well, I don't want to necessarily say too much about homosexuality. I don't want to say too much about some of these cultural trends because that'll run people off, right?
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. Well, that's a pragmatic spirit. I want to make sure that I sugarcoat things down. But then on the other end, I think there's a kind of pragmatism that plays either to political interest or just as we talked about earlier, where you're putting your hope and your trust and your validation. So every normal pastor and every normal church planter wants their church to grow. If you're the kind of guy that's like, I know I'm faithful because the place is shrinking, right? We must be doing something right. That's abnormal. It could be you're doing everything right and the Lord's not giving you growth. That could be, but it also could be that you're a jerk, you're lazy. It could be all kinds of things, right? So pragmatically, I think thinking through how do we fill seats, how do we reach people, and if you're trying to do, as Francis Schaeffer said, if you're trying to do the Lord's will in the world's ways, it's still a failure, even if you succeed, right? So we need to do the Lord's will in the Lord's ways. Wow. And that counts as success. Wow. So that to me, I think is still the great danger because pragmatism just plays out on so many different levels. Yeah. And it's different than practicality. I think some people have the misconception about, the gospel-centered thing, that it is antithetical to systems and organization, administration, and all those sorts of things. I think there's things we can be pragmatic about. When I walk into a church building, I want to know where the bathroom is, knowing the optimal place to put the sign, be totally pragmatic about that, right? Yeah. But when you start getting into the overlap of people's souls and hearts, I think being practical is important, but being pragmatic, where you turn the practical into a formula. If I do this, I will get that. If I push these buttons, I will get this result. If I'm not getting the result, it's because I haven't pushed the right buttons. That is so antithetical to spirituality and the supernaturality. Yeah. And that's kind of my big beef with pragmatism, is it basically says we don't really need the Holy Spirit. Yeah. Because we know exactly what to do. We know the strategies, the techniques, all those sorts of things. And so our trust ends up being there. That's sort of where my major concern has been and continues to be.
And the gospel becomes a sideshow or something that tries to undergird this pragmatism. We use it when it fits, but if it doesn't fit, we kind of leave it to the side. And man, that's good. That's challenging because church planting, entrepreneurial spirit, all those leaders, it's getting things done. And it's making things work and what's the win. And often we know that fruit from the gospel isn't often quick. It isn't often apparent. It takes time. Yeah.
I think this is really important right now because, the SBC in particular we've been trying to troubleshoot this declining baptisms, declining membership, for several years now, and it's sounding more and more dire, right, as we go. And the solutions always seem to be, well, here's the new initiative, here's the new program, here's the new, event we're going to do to get everybody on the same page, all these sorts of things. And there's nothing wrong with initiatives and events and programs and all that sort of deal. But in the heart of it, in the root of it, what are we trusting, to bring about the fruitfulness? Is it our efforts or is it the Holy Spirit? Yeah. I think it behooves us to be repentant, to be self-evaluative, to be faithful to the mission. It could be we're not reaching people because we're not being evangelistic enough. That's a complete possibility. It's also possible, knowing what the Bible says about the supernaturality of the gospel, the power of the gospel, that we are seeing an increase in church planting and evangelism, and it's just, for whatever reason, out of season. We can't reach into someone's heart and flip on the "I love Jesus" switch. We can tell them.
According to Noah, you can't.
Well,
I'm sorry, man. I couldn't help it.
even I cannot do that.
Yeah.
But we can tell people about Jesus. We can spread the seed far and wide, but we can't control what kind of soil it lands on. Now, that can't be an excuse for not being faithful. So
That's
please
right.
don't hear what I'm not saying.
That's such a good word.
But I think sometimes we just leave the supernaturality of the thing completely out of the equation, right? Paul planted, Apollos watered, but it was God who gave the growth.
That's right.
So one thing that I think could be missing, apart from that, is just prayer, like massive prayer. Lord, send workers into the harvest. Lord, give us a harvest.
Yeah.
Prayer is how we show we actually believe in the Holy Spirit. How we believe in the third person of the Trinity. You know?
Jared, before we close things down here, the listenership, the viewership, a lot of planters, pastors, people in our network, what's one thing you'd want to encourage them in today?
Well, if I could encourage anybody in anything, it would be to know that when you wake up in the morning, the Lord is not saying, "Show me what you got." I'm withholding my judgment till I see how your day goes.
Wow.
And no matter how the day goes, when you put your head down on that pillow at night, he's not
so
saying,
good.
"I thought you were better than this."
Man,
He's
receive
saying,
that.
"My beloved, my dear child."
Didn't I tell you?
You can't out-sin his grace. There's no amount of mistakes or mess-ups that's going to have him put you on the outs. You wake up into the favor of God. You go to bed into the favor of God. That is so centering and helpful for me, and I hope and pray it will be for your planters as well.
Man.
No, I know we need to wrap, but whenever we have somebody that has some affiliation with Midwestern, I just want to just put I want to shoot one quick shot. You know, you got the Spurgeon Hall of Fame there.
Yeah.
What's one thing that maybe our list, as a Spurgeon fan myself, that maybe we wouldn't know about his life, or about something that I just recently learned Spurgeon had 66 organizations that he started.
Yeah.
I was like, what? Who does that? But give us a Spurgeon fact that maybe we wouldn't know.
Well, did you know that the Southern Baptists wanted to kill him because of his stance against slavery?
Wow.
Yeah, so they put these ads in the paper. If he ever comes to the
have a
United States,
news
in
for
fact,
him.
he never came to the United States, and some think that's why, because he had death threats because he was opposed to slavery.
Wow.
Yeah.
Shout out to Spurgeon.
Spurge.
Shout out
We
to
love
Spurgeon.
him now.
We love him now.
But we wanted to kill him then.
Man,
Wow.
man.
Man.
Thanks
Well,
for sharing.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Hey, always great to have you,
Thank you, guys.
in my atmosphere. I told you, I'm gonna start crying as he's talking here at the end, preaching the gospel to me. And we hope you were edified today and encouraged. And we want to see a healthy, multiplying church in every community across North America. And that comes from understanding who we are in the gospel and identity in Jesus Christ. If you want to know more about church planting with the Send Network,
good.
check us out at sendnetwork.com, or text the phrase Send Network to 888-123. That's Send Network to 888-123. Subscribe to this podcast, share it with somebody it could be helpful, and until next time, we are Send Network.
You have been listening to We Are Send Network, a resource of the North American Mission Movement. For more information about today's podcast and other relevant resources, visit sendnetwork.com.